Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Fireside Chat. As always, I'm Sandro Mancuso. I'm here with my colleagues, José and Mashooq. So, first of all, if you are enjoying this chat, we would love to have you participating more and leaving your comments. Let us know which topics you would like us to address. Give the thumbs up. So, if you are new to these chats, we normally pick a topic just before we start discussing. And so we improvise a bit in the way we do things. And today we picked a very interesting topic that is about revolution versus evolution in software development. So what do we mean by those things, and when should we favor one over the other? So maybe we could start trying to define what do we mean by revolution and evolution in software development.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times we go to clients and, clients are asking this question, right? Like, what should I do? Should I, take what I have and evolve it? No, and especially with modernization projects, no, should I start where I am and continuously improve that, or should I scrap that completely and start from scratch? No, and build from the ground up something completely new. And it really depends, of course. No, the context is everything. But a lot of the times that starting from scratch is not very advisable for the business, because there's already a lot of value that whatever it is that you have there is providing. Whatever we had, even if it's not what we would like to have, it has value. It brought us all the way here, right? And the business is probably built on top of it, right? So it's not like you can simply, scratch it. And, we can't close the business for 3 months, 6 months, whatever amount of time, and then continue. So it's a bit difficult to reach. Let's say an agreement, that makes sense for that specific context, And I guess this is the interesting part. Well, like what kind of things we consider when we are, trying to advise our clients in that, and also mitigating the risks that come with doing this kind of stuff. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's been at the moment, it's almost perceived wisdom that don't start from scratch. These days, at least, that's what I see, that often people are quite reluctant to start from scratch. The revolution part, they're always looking. It always seems kind of a no-brainer to evolve rather than to kind of rewrite. Actually, this was not the case a while back, because the number of migration projects that I used to see, especially kind of 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of them. And there was almost a joke that these migrations never ended. So you had one kind of system, and they tried to create another one, and that one remained, and they had another one. And sometimes you'd have like 3 or 4 different stages of
versions of the same thing,
same thing being built from scratch. And so that's the other thought. And then I think behind that is that this almost like gross simplification of what we tend to have as a system. So especially bespoke systems, they are highly complex, and they are integrated into the organization and its processes and ways of working in a complex way, right? And when you look at it from a particular perspective, and there is a kind of a simplification, and because of that, a very optimistic view of the effort it will take to replicate that, but better, right? And that almost always failed or took a lot longer than was originally planned. And I think, given that history, what's happened is the appetite for revolution has waned considerably, and we're always going towards evolution. But my personal view is that evolution is not always the right approach, even though these days it's kind of considered to be always the right approach. And I guess that's what the talk is about, is, where I think it's easier to argue for evolution but not as easy to argue for revolution when you think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I remember like some when we were working for before Codurance, we were working for large organizations, and we even had that joke as well of those projects, right? So they were always trying to decommission some software, right?
Yeah.
So there was always a decommissioning project, and because of that, they would bring in a head of something, head of engineering, VP of this or VP of that, or CTO of whatever, and then they would say, okay, I have a new big plan, my 5-year vision to rebuild everything. And they would start that journey. But as they started the journey, so there was a lot of excitement because a lot of investment was putting into the rebuild of those systems. So there was an excitement, a different way of working, different technologies and stuff. However, during that period, the other systems had to be maintained because, as Mesh said, this is a long-term thing. So then you had that catch-up game, right? So while the new system is being built, the existing system is still evolving, and very rarely you reach a point where you can switch the key from going from the old to the new. So that is just one of the problems. And quite often during this period, the person or the people leading that transformation, they will start after 2 years. They create a lot of buzz in the company, a lot of excitement, but they still haven't done any. There's nothing delivered yet, but there was enough excitement. And sometimes they were even promoted to different departments or left the company so that a new person would come in, then now look at the mess of having an existing system and a half-built new system and say, okay, I have another 5-year plan to fix all of that. And they would start a new thing like that. So this is just one of the problems of the big revolutions. Another one is the skill set as well, that quite often the new systems are being built by the same people with the same skills, and they would build a new system that is as bad as the old one. So quite often that was another problem. However, as Mesh saying, so you were saying that not always, well, there is a case for revolution. So as big agile advocates, we normally favor evolution. I think most people in our industry today favors an evolution. But what would be, if we play the devil's advocate, what would be the cases where a revolution potential would be a good approach, and how can we do that safely, let's say, if possible?
So I think, so I mean, there are different perspectives to take here, right? So one is around software or software architecture, and the trend has been, at least in the, again, past 15-20 years, maybe not in the past couple of years, but the trend has been to build everything yourself. This was before the advent of better off-the-shelf and software as a service and those kind of things. These things have been around for a long time, but it seems like only recently we are learning how to commoditize that, because in previous kind of custom off-the-shelf software and so on, there were these behemoths application, right? They were everything to everybody. They were kind of these general platforms for application development rather than a solution, although they tended to a solution, like kind of take CRM type solutions and so on. There were heavy customization needed, and they sat right in the center of your technology estate. And what that meant was that, everything else that you built on top of it. And so they became integral and very difficult to evolve and everything else. But I think in the past few years, the trend has more been towards commoditizing systems and services where they do a well-focused thing, a small thing, really well, right? And they put a lot of effort in how that will fit or integrate into the rest of your ecosystem. And this, I think, this advent of this new breed, or I wouldn't even say the new breed, but it's more frequently we are getting a lot more of these commodity or commoditized software. I think there is a lot of leverage in being able to use that in organizations, because it's someone else who's completely concentrating on that thing and you don't have to, and it can actually lower the cost of development and operations and everything else for you. And in those cases, if you want to start using these kind of things, often you do need some kind of revolution in how your software is structured. And I think that's one a example where revolution might be the right thing, purely taking a kind of a software architecture perspective.
Mm-hmm. So more in terms of deciding what we do internally and what we use outside.
No,
It's like
I think Matt was referring to technology and taking advantage of the technology the best it can, right? Like the typical example is, I want to move to the cloud, and what I do is a lift and shift, which is basically I take exactly what I had in my on-prem and I try to replicate that in the cloud. And although that works, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the benefits of using that technology the way that it's supposed to be used. No, that commoditization that we were talking about, the components, the scalability, the cost benefits, and so on, you're not going to be gaining the advantage that you were looking for in the first place, right? And that requires a revolution. Right, because if your application was not thought out to take advantage of those things, right, or let's say created the seams needed so that you could, really isolate things and move them and reuse them or replace them and so on, then you're going to have to do it at that point, right? Otherwise, you're never going to realize the benefits of adopting that technology. Right? Or that,
mm-hmm.
And this is an architectural problem. No, that idea of those decisions that you made at the beginning that are going to be really hard to change afterwards. No, so if you find yourself that the decisions that you made are constraining you, then it becomes a good case for that revolution.
Cloud native is definitely one, right? The other things that I was actually also referring to is where, for example, let's take logistics, right? This problem is a general problem, and there's a lot of people and companies out there that are solving it as a service, right? Now, if I was building a kind of an e-commerce solution, an e-commerce product, let's say, and and I didn't have a logistics system, or I had one that was really in need of improvement, I would look towards these companies that have built logistics solutions. Same thing around kind of when you talk about e-commerce, like same thing about like product and stock and these kind of things, right? There are commoditized solution there, and the chances are they are not your secret sauce, right? And so not just cloud native, but these kind of things. That's the other thing. So cloud native is one type of area where revolution may be needed. Use of commodity software where you have a lot of complexity in your own system, but actually you can it's actually commoditized piece. It doesn't give you any edge in your business. That's another thing. And the third one that I think is where you have made a choice a long time ago to use, and I may have to mention some of the big packages, but like SAP Hybris, right? Or these CRM solutions. We were using some CRM solutions that it kind of did everything and allowed you to not only did the kind of the CRM part, but allowed you to put your whole product on top of it. So in these cases, the whole product was built on top of it, but they were not necessarily the right tool for everything, right? And so that's another area where I think the revolution may be needed.
I listening to you, I have a couple of other cases where I think it's also a valid strategy, or at least something to consider. One of them is obsolescence, right? Like you got something that you've extended the hell out of it, the life out of it, and at some point, the bathtub curve, right? Like at some point, it's going to start, stop working. Basically, you're going to start getting errors because it's reaching the end of life for that product, software, whatever. Maybe it's not maintained anymore. Maybe all these things, and then you have no other choice than to simply replace that. No, now this takes me to another point, which is a lot of people, what they do is, instead of rethinking what it is that are their new needs, and what it is that that software or technology that's going to replace needs to do in order to get the most out of it, what they tend to do is move in that line of, we move from an off-the-shelf product to a commodity, but we try to replicate exactly the same thing, right? So if we had SAP locally, now we're going to have SAP in the cloud, but we're still going to be using it the same way or whatever, right? And this is another point. When you have to, when your processes or your, let's say, value creation stream does not match the technology, that's another case for me when you really need to move away completely from that, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're forcing people to work in a specific way just because you have the technology, that's a problem, right? So the technology should be a means to an end. It should enable whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, and that's something that I find missing as well, and I think it's a valid, especially in cases where you're really signing around a constraint. And now we go to theory of constraints and that kind of stuff, right? Like your solution needs to account for something that was not there before, and maybe that's just removing completely a specific step. It's not about getting a new system that allows you to do exactly the same process maybe easier, right? It's maybe changing completely the way that you approach that, and not sending letters anymore, or not printing things, and like that is part of that innovation kind of aspect that I feel is also related to that.
Yeah, I hear that two different things in here. One is commoditizing things. So, for example, we stop building inside when we realize that whatever we are spending a lot of effort building and maintaining, we could just use a product, right? So that is one way, one side of revolution, because it's a big decision. But the other one is when we actually use the product, but way too close to our solution, where we build solutions that are too coupled to products, and those products are now not the right thing anymore, and we want to get rid of it. That will completely destroy what we built before, and we would need to. It will be very difficult just to. Of course, it's always possible to evolve, but it's painful and slow, right? So then we need to check. As you were speaking, I was thinking, what are the key things? For example, I believe that most people would prefer an evolution approach. It's less risky, you experiment more. I think that we can spend a long time making a case for an evolutionary approach instead of a revolutionary, even when we are making those decisions. Start small, try to change, and so on. But I think that what I wanted to bring up is, why do we still have that urge to go for a revolution? What are the triggers that say, if I could, I was just like obliterate everything that we have and start again? And if there is a way to remove that sentiment in a way, and I'll just give a few examples just to get it started. But like, for example, quite often say, well, it's very difficult to maintain this thing or to test this thing, or building new features are too slow because we have old technology, and so on and so forth, right? So at some point you are so tired of it, so it would be great if we could have a brand new system. But I wonder, for example, take microservices as an architecture, for example. If we were able to architect our systems in a modular manner, right, we probably would decrease the need for big revolutions, because the modular architecture would allow us to have localized problems. Of course, we still have a big problem in integrating all those systems. We understand the complexity shifts to the integration and so on. But like, a better architecture might reduce significantly the urge that we have for revolution.
But I think there is in this case, we are talking about, actually, if you've gone down the modular route where evolving or replacing smaller parts is easy,
Even isolating products, even for example, when you are integrating or using products that are part of your solution, but you do that in a very isolated, very well defined with an API that you control on top of it. See what I'm saying? So
Yeah, modular,
yeah.
rather than doesn't have to be microservice, but if you have a modular solution and then you can replace those modules independently, uh, then you're already in the ideal state, right? I think what we are talking about is when you have a intertwined thing that is very difficult to change in parts, right? So a kind of an unstructured monolith basically is where I guess when we're talking about evolution versus evolution, or at least when I was talking about it, the start state is that when you have an unstructured monolith, right?
No,
If
I
you already
understood that.
Mhm.
Sorry, I understood that. What I
So
was saying is like, is there a way to first of all, for example, if we do an evolutionary approach towards a architectural model,
yes,
then would we remove the needs for
well,
revolution in the future, for
I
example?
I think this is a very very good question, but actually, the answer to this is not all, evolutionary approach is not always the right thing. The reason is that you really have to understand, I talk about this complexity in the problem domain and complexity in the solution domain, right? So the complexity in the problem domain will transfer to your solution. That's the minimum complexity that you will have. But then the way that you have devised a solution will make it more and more complex. And this is, you can also call it accidental complexity, right? Now, you have to then, when you are evolving a system, you are trying to reduce this accidental complexity, right? Sometimes your system is the accidental complexity is a an order of magnitude more than the complexity in the problem domain. So, and this is often like you would see these systems that are just completely over engineered, and they are so they even have a lot of dead code in them, right? And they are kind of intertwined in so many ways that actually taking an approach to say, well, the problem in this case is not as complex or is much less complex than the solution. And in this case, you should have a really strong think about whether, because you're evolving that, taking it to the point where it becomes modular is gonna be a very long, hard slog. Because what you're not only dealing with the complexity of your problem domain, you're dealing with the complexity of the solution, and you're constantly dealing with it. And it's the debt against which you are paying interest over and over and over again until it becomes something that is manageable. So I think this, I guess there is an inflection point on whether you should take the evolutionary approach or the revolutionary approach based on how complex and difficult to evolve your system is. The other side of that is who is evolving it, right? How are you, if you are trying to evolve this whole thing, do you have the right kind of skills there as well, right? And if it's really difficult, and on top of that, you don't have the right skills to evolve it, it's going to become even more difficult, right? So I think it's not a straightforward always to say, um, go modular first, make it easy to change, and then replace bits. I think sometimes you have to take a different approach. I don't think it's always the right approach.
And it may be driven by strategy and product and the business itself, right? Like we're doing this thing because we want to accomplish certain things in the business, right? Like we have targets that we need to make. We need to push out certain features or add new things to the product or whatever, right? And that's also a constraint, right? So the time aspect or dimension of that, how much time do I have in order to do this, is I think another important factor, right? If writing it from scratch will allow me to hit those targets versus having to should I go for that, or should I go and try to evolve and maybe during the way sacrifice some of the things that I want to achieve just because I want to evolve, right? And
But,
this is sorry.
so one thing I would just to pick on writing it from scratch. If someone said to me, "I have this system and I'm going to write it again, but better," I would probably the time when I would say I'm gonna build it again better and build it because all these other things are already done for me, and I'm just gonna put them together and build the parts that I really need to be customized. I think that would be the approach that I would be more inclined to then start really looking at. But if you're gonna just rewrite the same thing completely, then you're gonna make the same mistakes.
Yeah, and also it's not the same thing, because a lot of the times we lose sight that the system is the spec, right? And it has continued to evolve, right? So whatever you had in documentation, maybe 10 years ago when you started, right, of what that thing needed to do has now evolved, right? And the documentation for it is in the system. It's no longer something that you can just take out, and there is that overhead, and there's that complexity added to what you're doing. I think there is an aspect of evolution that is very attractive, which is the idea of keeping the machine running, right? Like changing the wheels in the car while the car is going, right? And a lot of people think of rewrite as we need to stop the car and start building something else, then we can start it. And that's not always the case. You can actually have both systems working together, right, as you're building one and sort of like decommissioning the other or removing the other. But that requires certain skills that are not the common ones that you get when people go out of university, or when they're being building applications greenfield all the time, right?
Sorry, go on, Sandro.
No, go on, Mash.
No, just something funny came to my mind because someone said fairly recently I was in a project with a client, and they said, "Oh, I don't like this metaphor of like exactly he talked about a car and changing the wheel while the car is running." He said there is a possibility of that. What we have is a jet and aeroplane, and the engine is on fire. We need to land this thing before we do anything else.
So, this is actually like this pressure of delivery and fixing problems is just another big constraint on top of a revolution. Right, because you still need to keep maintaining the existing things. You still have the pressure of the business of keep delivering and fixing whatever issues that you might have. We have like multiple modernization projects, and everything that we say is it needs to be contextual. So and of course it will be very difficult to give all the different contexts in here. For example, we had a project where we did what you were saying, Jose, where we were building a new system while integrating with the other one. In fact, like we've done twice that I was a bit closer at least. One was moving from the biggest challenge was moving different stacks. So we had like a node big PHP system, and we were trying to move Java microservices and keeping the new with the old system. And we've done that, but it was very difficult because the skill set that you need to have, you need to understand the new stack well so that you don't make the same mistakes. So as you are building a new system, hopefully we build with less mistakes, which is not always the case, as we just discussed. So you need to have very good skills on the new stack and tech, but we also need to understand very well the old one, because you need to be doing the surgery on the old system and disabling some of the features and redirecting things to a different system in a different stack. Moving stack trees, moving across the same stack is easier. Moving across different stacks is extremely complex. And even like going, as we were talking about lift and shift and stuff, most of those things, you need to react at all your systems to benefit from the environment, from the cloud. So do cloud native, and quite often you need to change the stack as well. Because like not always it will be a good idea to to go serverless and use JVM or .NET. Maybe you're gonna use for a slightly different stack for some of those modules, right? But there were a few things that I wanted to mention on the monolith that you referred to, Mesh, the revolution implies a lot of risks, right? And I find it difficult to balance that sometimes, because the evolutionary approach, you minimize risk. You do that things incrementally, you learn, you adapt, and your system is always in a working state. A revolutionary approach, you might go a bit faster building the new one, but in the great scheme of things, you might be a bit slower to switch from the old to the new, because it's a big switch going from one system to another. And there is the hybrid approach that you mentioned, Jose.
Yeah, that's what I'm, because this is a strategy more to handle the risk of return on investment than it is the risk of rebuilding the solution and actually
not
finishing.
Only return on investment, not only return on investment, is the actual getting things wrong, because like the revolutionary approach, there's lots of risks.
So of course, but what I meant by that is you may not, and that risk of starting from scratch and finding yourself in a state where you never finish the rewrite, or you already, and by that point you are starting the next rewrite. You know what I mean? Like that initial case that you mentioned, where there was always some decommissioning going on and so on. That's what I mean by that, right? Like you still, by doing that, by having both solutions, yes, of course, you're minimizing the risk of building the thing and actually getting what you want. No, it's like, this is why we have walking skeletons and all of these things, right? So that's the idea. But beyond that, from a business perspective, I think there is this aspect of, I'm not going to have to wait 6 months, whatever amount of time it requires to get something built that I can start using and do the switch, the big bang release, right? And I'm going to be able to get that as soon as possible, which is something that the evolutionary approach kind of has, ingrained, and this is I think a distinction that is important. I was trying to say before, it requires certain skills to be able to do it like that. Otherwise, people will go, by default, they will go to we will start writing it new, and then when it's ready, when it's feature complete, when we have the minimum features, then we will do a switch, and then it's not properly handled a lot of the time. This is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, and I think taking a revolutionary approach does not mean that you don't iterate, and you can even think about, like, for example, if you take a complete revolution, you start rebuilding a complete product. You might even start with kind of a kind of vertical feature set that some customers are being sent to, right, where others are using the old system. So you can start kind of experimenting. You can start bringing it in and just bringing it into market early. Bringing a kind of a revolution to market early is an approach that you can take. You don't have to have this big bang thing. I'm going to switch this off and I'm going to start this. In fact, I want to talk a bit, because revolution versus evolution speaks of strategy. It's actually it's about organizational strategy. And one thing I was reading up a while back on a kind of a strategy book, I think it was Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, where they talked about the phenomena on why people like Google and Facebook can't innovate. I mean, they have all the resources at their disposal. Why are there's always these new startups appearing, and why can't, like, the likes of Google and Facebook, why are they buying them? Why can't they build their own new startups? And there he talks about this success factor. Once you kind of become too successful in a particular area and it becomes ingrained, you no longer think about kind of doing something completely different in a completely different way. And what that means is that you can't innovate. You're always stuck in these ways of working, and there is almost this inertia, and there is this fear that things are working well. Why do I want to do something in a very different way, even if there are many good reasons for it? Because things are working, right? And this is the kind of culture in organizations that actually makes them stop innovating. And creating this, and innovation is often revolution. So always taking an evolutionary approach in some ways stifles innovation in the way that your product and processes are being built.
Well, I don't entirely agree with that. Maybe I haven't read that book and so on, but I think there is, in the continuous improvement kind of thing, there is innovation in that, because innovation or innovate is like there is a novelty, right? Like there is this thing that we're doing different now, and it's not disruptive, it's not radical, it may not be the optimal even, right? Like we may be optimizing for a local for a local thing and not the global. There's a better solution, but we're not exploring that, right? And that I completely agree with. There's also a factor of, it's easier to just buy the thing that's already built, if it is what you want, if you're at that point, then building it from scratch, because it will take time. Even if you think you can do it better, it will take time. So a lot of the time you want to make the decision, just buy it, and have that innovate by acquiring what you already want to. You bring it in, you rebrand it, you adopt it, whatever it is that you're going to do. So it's a different strategy. I wouldn't say they're not innovating. It's what I don't completely agree
So
with.
I think when I was talking about innovation, I'm talking about disruptive innovation. I'm talking about when you change the problem context, right? Because often when you are replacing this thing and that thing, and even when you take a modular approach, you're just replacing stuff. You're not, and it will push you down a particular route, right? The analysis of the problem, how you model the problem, is going to remain as is. Maybe change small changes. Sorry, go on, Sandro.
No, what I think that I don't see that as a clear cut. I think I'm somewhere in between here. I think that a lot of companies have ideas, but some ideas, in order to actually work on them, they might perceive that it's too expensive, because the chains are too big, or it's going to take too long. So what I was thinking is, for example, if you are running a product company and you have a bunch of systems that you look after, so if we are constantly focused on keeping our systems flexible, right? Whatever flexibility might mean, but like an architecture that is flexible, because we don't know exactly where we are going to innovate. Innovation doesn't, for example, not always we know, oh, this is what you're going to innovate. Sometimes it will, as we are evolving, as we are having different conversations, as they do different businesses, they might have different ideas. And at that point, they will need to make a judgment call and say, hey, if we wanted to implement this idea or try this out, how expensive would that be? How much stuff that we need to change? So if we work in a way where our systems are always ready for changes, like they are flexible enough, and that comes with a cost as well, as we all know. But if our architecture remains flexible, it becomes cheaper to experiment. It's easier to do more experiments and then hopefully innovate. What will not help is to have like all those big systems all interconnected. That would certainly stifle.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think what I'm actually arguing for is both. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think you do need flexible enough systems where you can innovate at in part, like at a local level, right? And you also need in your organization a way of innovating at the system level, at a holistic level. So at the local level, of course, this area now I can, I was building, let's say, e-commerce solution, and I built my product the way I modeled the product myself, but now I see a SaaS thing, I can replace that, and I'm innovating in certain ways, and that's one thing. In another place, I can even completely try to turn things on its head, right? How I am serving the customer, or how I am putting my products in front of the customer, and so on. And you're then not at the solution level, you are actually at the problem level, and you're allowing the problem to shape that. And there's this constant experimentation that is not constrained by how quickly you can change the system. You can build something from scratch to try these new ideas out and run with it and have this thing in your organization where the architecture or the system level products are structured in a way that allow you to do these smaller experiments outside the kind of the product, the big product that you have to evolve and takes time to evolve, right?
So let's just for me to see if I understood where you were coming from. So you are not talking about systems integration. You are more talking about having a ways of working in the organization where, for example, you don't have heavyweight process where we can just, for example, if you want to come up with a small proof of concept and you push it out, you would not be blocked by the bureaucracy of going to production or writing documentation or go through 10 levels of approval. Is that where you are coming
No,
from?
I'm saying that you should be allowed to go to production, and you should even be allowed to experiment with a small set. So I think there were at one point there were some things similar happening at Facebook, right,
Mm.
where they would allow there was not huge heavyweight processes in putting things live. The only thing was that whatever features that you put live, they would start very small, right, and they in terms of who it's available to, and slowly grow, right? So that's what I'm talking about. You should be able to build your own processes, your own ideas, model your own problems. So this is the innovative side of how you build the organization, its processes, its ways of working. There is this kind of whole we have this mega product that everything is relying on, and of course there is a lot of rigor, right? And then there is kind of this room for experimentation that is allowing me to kind of hit the market early with things complete with experiments that are related to the market, and not related to how quickly I can change this piece of software, that the major bit of software. So that's what I mean.
It's also about the size of the steps that you take, even if you are reinventing or if you are evolving, no, to some extent, because the bigger the size, the bigger the risk. No, the more you will have to pay or invest into. I'm not talking only about money, right? Like we have the J curve, no, and if you look at the, let's say, organizational change related to adopting or pushing something like a new solution in and so on, you have that almost valley of death, no, like that investment where, okay, this is the status quo, something happened, chaos. Oh, look, we have an idea on how to solve this. Oh, we need to start integrating it, and then you'll take some time until you go, hopefully, to a better state than you were before, right? And this is things that this is something that things like agile methodologies, Scrum, Kanban, etc. try to mitigate, instead of doing that big bang release or that big change now that you're trying to go for. You do smaller incremental ones, no, and you sort of like pay less, make sure that you get the return, pay less, make sure that you get it, and eventually you'll try to get where you want to go, no, and it'll give you that adaptability and so on. It's the same with experimentation or with this revolution. No, we're calling it revolution approach, where even if you're starting from scratch, the size is also important, right? How big is my experiment? How experiment is my experiment? No, is an important aspect of that. No, and again, there are many ways to mitigate that. There's lean startup methodology and customer development and all these things that sort of allow you to have that feedback loop and learn and, let's say, justify a bigger investment each time, no, and try to validate those things. But it is also about that cost, no, at the organization level and at all levels within the organization, no, people, skill, technology, and so on, right?
Yeah, those are good points, because I've seen many times in some of our clients and even in our previous life before Codurance, a lot of people inside organizations with a lot of good ideas, but they don't have either the people to do that, or the expertise to do that, and then they end up, after a lot of asking and almost begging, they end up being given like some time or a few people here and there to start an experiment, but those experiments are being done in a very amateurish way, and then those good ideas die because of the experiment. The experiment itself kills a good idea because the experiment was not done well, either because they don't have enough people or the skills, or in the middle of the experiment because it's not treated as a strategic approach. Those people pulled out because something else is on fire. Or again, the lack of skill killed all of it because it was very slow. And then it's okay. So if this new thing is going to be so slow or so difficult to do, then we don't want to do. But maybe
and organizational constraints got in the way. Basically, that's what this is my big problem with the, doesn't, if you have a large product doesn't matter how well structured it is, right? If that's the only way that people have to bring their ideas in, it's gonna get, it's gonna become difficult to change, right? Not necessarily very difficult, but there's degrees of difficulty, right? And experimenting in a product live, doesn't matter how well set up it is, right? You're gonna have it's gonna take time, and those experiments are gonna become costly, right? Because it's kind of fail fast type thing. But if you have set up your organization systems, ways of working in a way that a new system can come in and completely bypass. I mean, a lot of people talk about this, company made up of startups team. Each team is almost like a startup, where you can bring up another team at the center of kind of around an idea, and they can work in as much of an autonomous way as possible to bring their idea to market, right? That's the kind of organization, those are the kind of systems and ways of working. That's where you want to point.
So basically, there could be a small revolution within an area of organization, because that I was when I read Lean Startup, which goes many years ago, I was actually surprised to see that the Lean Startup could be applied in large organizations. And for me, Lean Startup was just about startups, but not a mindset or a ways of working. And so basically, what we're saying is before we even start an experiment, we should look at the organizational constraints and say, what are the constraints that we can remove? So how can we make this experiment a success and remove everything we can? So we are still compliant. Some organizations, they need to be compliant to regulations and all this kind of stuff, or certification, so on. But then how can we limit that to the bare minimum, right? And remove as much bureaucracy as we can. But that is a revolution in a way, but it's a controlled revolution potentially.
One thing is, we're going a lot into innovation. I would say that there's a really good article in the Harvard Business Review around strategies for innovation. I'll try to find that and maybe put it in, we can put it in the comments or whatever, that specifically deals with different strategies. How can you manage that? Because some things are better, the strategy will be better to just find a group of people that are really good within your organization and put them together and have them work on this thing. Other strategies are things like, we'll buy someone else, right? And that already has the product, has the culture and whatever. And each of those scenarios, I think there was 4 or 5 approaches. Each one of those scenarios has its pros and cons, and it's really very contextual, which is, again, just not going too much into the innovation side of things, because we were talking about revolution and continuous improvement. When to start from scratch versus when to, and there is an aspect that we haven't discussed, which is the why, right? And I'm gonna go there now, because a lot of times I've seen people, let's say, put forward a change because they want to learn a specific technology, or because they want to, try out a new architecture or whatever. Sandro, I think you referred to this as, CV-driven development. No, it was the latest thing that I want to put in my CV, and then I'm going to try that. And I feel like that's the wrong approach. Is there something that you shouldn't do, right? Is to think in those terms and be very clear about what it is that what it is and why it is that you want to do this. Is it innovation? Is it, what are the trade-offs that you're doing when you're choosing one strategy or another, and how, and even what technologies or how you're going to be implementing those things, which is a reflection that a lot of the time people don't make. Right, Kubernetes is the trending thing. Let's all move to Kubernetes, right? You may not need that, right? And that's also an important aspect, because although you get a lot of motivation, no, like Sandro was saying in the beginning, no, you create a lot of, oh yeah, let's do this, and people are very engaged and so on. Then you may not hit the goals at the business level in order to make sure that is sustainable in the long term, that actually accomplishes what you set out to do, right? And
so in terms of the CV building, that is one thing that I would love to see that would build the CV and say, okay, I'm impressed now. Is like, for example, if you want to build your CV up, so like, what, I was working with my current employer or former employer, and we had this business problem, we had this context, those complexity of the systems and stuff, and I was I actively participate in creating a strategy to actually migrate those things to change the systems, and that's the kind of business value that we had and stuff. I would be massively impressed with that, right? But if you say, oh, I use Kubernetes, I say, yeah, whatever, right? There are loads of other people that can also do that, but like, so if you want to increase to build a CV, like build with, this is how we went from A to B, and that's all the improvements that we've made in terms of business and processes and so on and so forth. I just want to mention that. There is one thing that I would like to just to say, like going back to the technical side and architecture. After quite a few modernization projects, I'm still, I will always lean towards the evolution, but I feel that quite a few times it's way too slow, and it will take some special cases, as we discussed previously, earlier on in this conversation. But I also, so to convince me to go to a revolution. But I also feel that the evolutionary approach, mainly for modernization projects, we should take bigger risks. We should take some bigger steps, not potentially all the way to let's redo everything, but the evolutionary steps, sometimes they need to be bigger with a bigger risk, because it takes way too long. It's a big investment and takes a long time for the return. And we might get a better return if we take bigger risks, but it's a risk. Right?
I totally agree with that. In fact, taking that example, and I think we had this, right, where an e-commerce solution was being modularized, before we could commoditize certain things. You could actually take a different approach. You'd say, well, actually, I'm not going to modularize it. I'm going to bring, like, let's say in this case, I need to manage product, right? And I'm going to bring a SaaS solution in for handling product or handling payments or these kind of things. And then I'm going to see how I can integrate that with, so you kind of, rather than you taking an approach where let me make it better and then push this commodity in, I'm saying is let me bring the commodity in, almost like in, at a lower level, we create these behavior attractors, right? You create a class because it's the responsibilities that this class may have are scattered all the way around your code. You create a class and it's considered a behavior attractor. What starts happening is you name it while it's in a good place, and all that stuff starts moving in there, because now you have something that is for that. And in a similar way, you can create these behavior attractors outside. So that's just one strategy of taking bigger leaps, because here you're actually putting the product SaaS thing in first, and you're saying, okay, now I'm gonna start using it and see how my product evolves.
That project in specific, just for people's context, like we had a much smaller developers population, and that could have worked. But for example, in another project that we have like hundreds of developers spread in multiple countries, and all of them work on the same monolith. So even doing that becomes very difficult because the release of the software becomes complex, right? So the release process is a big bottleneck, and the amount of testing that goes in and stuff. So sometimes, like, I think we should just get a big axe, or how do we call the motosserra is in Portuguese, is the
Chainsaw.
A chainsaw.
a chainsaw, and brrr, and really cut, even with rough edges, and detach a whole chunk of things and teams and from the big thing, because you cannot work in such a small increments in such a large code base with hundreds of developers changing and wait for the modularization to arrive so that you carve out nicely. You need to take a big risk sometimes and say, you know what, let's just remove it, even if you put some plaster to keep the connection between the two pieces. But at least now we have that thing separate. Mm-hmm. And then we will start evolving it. But it needs to be sometimes a more aggressive approach, because sometimes it takes way too long. An evolutionary approach trying to minimize risks all the time might actually not increase risks, but it might not bring the return on investment. I think that's probably the right way of putting this.
And there's an aspect of this, which is continuous improvement is also a culture that you need to have, right? And if you don't have that, it's going to be even slower, right? Because you're going to have to build both things. You're going to have to build that culture where people are, going in and thinking, okay, how can I make this better, right? And they're really caring for that, and they're really aligned around what they want to achieve. It's not just everyone building their own ball of mud, isolation, and then trying to right. And that's a cultural aspect as well, right? That if you don't have plus the skills, it's just, I would say, almost impossible, right?
And this is a good point, because, for example, changing culture is also a thing that is very difficult to do with a revolution. It's almost impossible. In my view, I cannot see how mainly when you are talking about large organizations with hundreds of people, you don't just flick the fingers and bang, you have a different thing. So you don't cause a revolution very easy. It needs to be an evolutionary approach. However, those evolutionary approaches in our culture takes forever. And this is what you were saying. The reason I'm mentioning that is because what you were saying, Jose. For example, sometimes we were in situations in a few projects that the people trying to make the system better, step by step, could not do as fast as other people would make it worse. So you were always in a losing game. You were improving areas, but people were, because of the way that the organization worked and the general skill set, the system was always, you'll never win that race.
But that's right? An example of treating the symptom, no, and not the cause.
So yeah, but sometimes for me, like, I cannot see. This is why I was talking about taking bigger risks and bigger steps, because sometimes, like, you cannot wait to fix every. To upskill every single person in the organization and then wait for that to start improving, because this will take years and never going to happen. People move, new people join, and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes it's just say, you know what, let's carve this piece out. Let's be aggressive. Take this bit out because it's the bit that is more important, is more strategic for us moving forward and stuff. And once you are able to do that, we can move faster in a more localized place, and then we take a slower approach in a place that is less strategic. It's not that you're not going to look after the rest, but you can take more time to do that. But if you want to move faster, you need to be more aggressive, and that may cause a small revolution in the company, because that you might have to create to break a few silos, but even create new silos in order to do that.
Or people who are, describing why wasn't I chosen to to join that team? No,
the commando team.
exactly
SWAT
right,
team.
and that kind of like it's really like you need to be very careful with these things, because when we
It doesn't necessarily need to be a commando, but by the way, it can be just an area. People work in a specific area. It's not necessarily, because there are multiple ways. There is a commando team that you try to do something, but there is isolating
but it is creating a silo, and in this case,
of
is
course.
also there's a class kind of thing happening there,
Of course.
and this is something that can actually go against what you're trying to achieve. This is why there is this aspect of the technology and the architecture and how you choose things and all that stuff that's very necessary, but I would say works in a more concrete, objective, tactical kind of thing. And then you have the high level, the forces or the climate inside the organization, so to speak, that is moving, that is changing. There are these forces and these things that are moving in there, and you also need to account for those as part of your strategy for it.
Sure, but if you try to cater,
so on, right?
No, I get it. But if you try to cater for all the different individual needs, the organization is never going to move, and we need to accept the fact that certain areas of the organization or certain areas of the product are more important than others, and that will always be the case.
That's not the argument. The argument is those things need to be managed. It's not like you cannot do that. Is you need to be aware that when you do something like that, there are risks involved, and you need to address them. Otherwise, you could create a problem as well,
and we've seen that.
It could be even bigger, right? So that's the thing as well, right?
We've seen that in some organizations, because we are separating some people, but although this is we've seen that some people say, I would love to be in that team and stuff. This problem, at least from the very the anecdotal experience, because it's just like my experience. In that, I don't have any scientific data, but this problem has proven smaller than previously anticipated. People that really feel left out are very few ones, and normally those ones that would feel left out are the ones that you want in the new thing anyway, because they are the ones more engaged, they are the ones contributing and stuff like that. So yes, there will always be, but you need to prioritize. I don't have a perfect solution. I wish I had. But in those large organizations, large systems and stuff, you need to focus and prioritize. And as you do that, some people in areas will get more attention than others, right?
I think what Jose is also trying to say is that yes, you need to do that, but also you need to manage it well in the sense that you need to take the whole organization with you on that journey. And when people understand the reasons behind why this team was created or this thing was done, they understand it and they were part of that decision-making process. And so it is an organization's decision. But in certain cases, when it's done completely from the top, without a lot of explanation, without a lot of consultation and involving people in that process, that's when things go wrong.
It's not only that, is the process and it's the composition of that. Because it's not only about having a sense of being left out. It's also how you make sure that the people that you're putting in there have the aggregated skill set required to make things successful, right? Motivation is one of them. Motivation is one of them, but sometimes you also need, the authority and decision making. Well, sometimes no, all the things that I'm gonna say are you need them, right? So the authority and the decision making power. You need people who are really good at executing. You need people who are really good at inspiring others or getting people to engage with things. You need really good communicators. All those things, and we've seen it many times. You put together the motivated guys. Maybe they're very good technically or not, or they'll get there. But when it comes to explaining what it is that needs to be, they suck at it. And when it comes to trying to get people engaged, or when it's to try to negotiate within the organization to align expectations or needs or whatever, they suck at it. So all of those things are not just the technology side of things if you want to make sure that it's successful, right? It's what I was trying to say. And creating a group by definition already, like if you're saying these people are going to be, call it whatever, team A, call it coalition, call it whatever, right? The people that are leading the transformation, whatever, that already creates a separation.
Yeah, but see, for example,
carefully. Yeah.
But this is the thing. Like, I don't remember us trying to do any of that in terms of like, hey, create a big fuss about it. This is another thing. Is like quite often like an area is chosen and then people start working on it and improving that area. But it's not a big fuzz in terms of putting people on top of the fire brigade truck and go to the streets. We are the saviors of the world. And so there's nothing like that. It's just like, like there are a few areas that we need to improve. We're going to start from here. Who is working in that area? Those are the group of people that are already working in those areas. Okay, let's work with them and start. So there's no big fuzz either. So, and also one thing that is important to say is that there should be a plan for everything. So it's just a matter of explaining priorities for everyone involved and stuff. And normally those people will create a few experiments and we'll be working with other people as well, integrating with them. And also we need to remove the glamorous, because like quite often these kind of initial focused areas, let's call it, or not even call it a team or stuff, like just we are focused in a specific area. People think there's not a lot of glamour doing that work, because depending on the work that is being done there, it's a lot of frustration because you are trying to break some silos, you are trying to fight the system in a way, you are trying to change things and you want to go live and you cannot go and we need to speak to someone because you are trying to do things differently. So there is a lot of frustration in doing that work at the beginning. It's not just like playing with new toys and going live, because that would be very easy to do, right? So we are actually going to the heart of areas that very few people wanted to work on, and actually start fixing them. And going to old PHP systems or 20-year-old Java systems right into the middle and start detaching 2,000 tables. There's not a lot of glamour in there, So we just need also to make sure that this is well explained as well. Right,
yeah.
so
I think we are in
a good time to wrap up.
Yeah. As always, no, we we could be talking for hours.
This could be a very long conversation.
Excellent. Okay, so I really enjoyed it. So any final words from anyone?
I mean, I can start, but I think my view is evolution versus evolution. It almost simplifies. I mean, and of course, in a title, you want to simplify. The problems are always more complex, and you have to take evolutionary and revolutionary approaches in different parts of your problem when you're fixing them. I think my main thing is that you shouldn't take evolution for granted as being the only approach, because sometimes it's easier to justify. Well, it's always often easier to justify than a revolutionary approach. But sometimes, as you said, bigger steps are needed, and sometimes very large steps indeed are needed. And the other thing is that you should allow your organization and ways of working so that both evolution and revolution have a place in it.
Yeah, Jose, any final words?
I think that covers it pretty well. I would just mention that whatever path you take, you need to make sure that you understand what the of course benefits, but also what the constraints and the risks are, and that you manage them. We were talking about certain things like culture and so on that seem to be very abstract, but they are very much something that can kill whatever initiative you're going to put forward, right? And you need to take care of it as well, right? It's not just a matter of technology, and it's not just a matter of the skill set either, right? Make sure you dedicate the resources to handle that and to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from my side, I think that one thing I would like to explore is like the idea that as we are evolving our systems, we evolve them in a way that we minimize the need for future revolutions. Like so, or the revolutions are much smaller, controlled and stuff. So if we have systems that are always recalibrated, they are always realigned, they're actually is always in a place where we minimize the need for a revolution, I think that we would be also in a good stage. So cool. Well, as always, like if people enjoyed this, if you are watching this and you are enjoyed this chat, give us a thumbs up. But most importantly, let us know what you would like us to talk. Like as you can see, we love talking. So let us know the kind of things that you would like us to talk about, and we'll do our best to pick your topic.
And subscribe so that the next episode, is right. Yeah, you're notified when when it's out.
Perfect. Thank you very much. See you in the next episode.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.